Good morning. We're now going to start part 9 of this talk about who the Messiah is and when. Well, we can't give really when he's coming, but we could give sort of an idea of how it fits into things. We're going to look now at Ezekiel. Yesterday, we finished with a war that was going on with some nations north of Israel, perhaps Gaza, and the Messiah comes, or the king that brings peace, comes right there about in the middle of this war. And I want to say that peace is a key issue about what it's like when the Messiah comes.
Yeah.
If we don't have peace, then we don't have Messiah. Okay?
All right.
That's an understood.
Mhm.
That is one of the things that comes with it. So now we're going to see how that segment of Zechariah fits in with Ezekiel. And then we'll see that Ezekiel gives a few more details. In Zechariah, it mentions Joseph fighting this battle with Judah. That Judah is the bow and Joseph is the arrows, and so on and so forth. They're working together. So it's only in Ezekiel that you get more detail on this.
Okay.
And this requires us to understand something from chapters 34 on to the end of Ezekiel. And we won't be able to cover it all today. But one of the important things is giving a summary of chapter 36 of Ezekiel. And I'm going to just summarize that in a paragraph. It would go something like this. God speaks to the land
Okay.
at the beginning of 36,
Mhm.
and he commands it, produce fruit, for I'm bringing my people home. He says in the chapter, when they come home, they will not be clean, but I'll clean them up, so that you will not cause them to be scattered anymore. Because not living right here in the land is what gets you kicked out.
Yeah. Right.
So he's got to clean them up. This is a process.
Mm-hmm.
And God can do it in any number of years that he wants to. We can't tell God what to do or how to do it or decide what he should be doing.
Yeah.
Then he tells the people he is gathering them that he can cleanse them, and the nations will profane them no more.
Okay.
This indicates that he's doing something then with the enemies. So while this process is going on, we don't have peace.
Right. Yeah.
Now, in chapter 34 of Ezekiel, I'd flip over to there, and God says in verse 15 of Ezekiel 34, I'll lift up my Bible so I don't have to have my head clear down. I myself will graze my flock, and I myself will let them lie down, declares Hashem God. I will look for the lost. I will bring back the stray. I will bandage the injured. I will sustain the weak, and the fat and healthy ones I will destroy. I will tend them rightly.
Wow.
So what this is saying is nobody's done it right up until now.
Some have
So,
tried, but
well, of course, we've seen that clear through the Samuel and Kings and the prophets. They've all tried. But God says, they've done a miserable job. And furthermore, in our day and age, when you talk about gathering the lost tribes of Israel, Joseph, people just won't even listen to you because how can that be? We don't know where they are, but God does.
Yeah.
He's infinitely sees more than we do.
Oh yeah.
And when he says he's going to do something, he will do it. And so he says here, nobody's interested in this. So I have to do it myself. And so he says, after he discerns between the healthy and the fat and the weak, because the healthy and fat are people that are getting rich off the land for their own benefit. And they're trampling all over the ones that need help.
Yeah.
So he says after that, after I've decided between one animal and another, in verse 22, he says, then I will appoint a single shepherd over them to tend them, my servant David.
Oh, wow.
Now, I think different translations say different things there. I think some of them say, my prince David. He will tend them, and he shall be a shepherd to them. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David shall be a ruler among them. And some of them use the word king there, I think. And then the whole point of this is, they shall know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and they, the house of Israel, are my people, declares the Lord God. So there we see in chapter 34 a very overall view. Now the next chapters will give us detail. It's always, when you get some of the repeat of the same information, it's because the chapter is elaborating and giving more detail of what he was talking about. So in chapter 36, we find that the nations around them are taunting them and making fun of them and trying to take possession of them. And in some cases, they do take some possession of them.
This has happened in history in the past as well.
Yes, and we
With Babylon.
know who survives, whether the world likes it or not. It's just not a good idea to mess with what God plans to do.
No.
So he said, if you bless Abraham, I'll bless you.
Yeah.
He says again in Exodus through the Gentile prophet, if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed.
Yeah.
Balaam says, I can't curse when God says bless.
What you just read about these, or no, you heard somebody talking about the countries that removed the Jews, what happened to them?
Oh, that was quite an eye-opener when you stop to think about the history of it. Egypt in bondage them to the point that they really wanted to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And but they didn't want to get rid of them the way they wanted.
No.
They didn't want them to survive after they left. They didn't want them to leave and survive. They wanted to get rid of them, period.
Yeah.
What happens though when God takes them out? Egypt goes down.
Yeah.
What happens when Babylon takes them out? It goes down.
Yeah.
What happened to Assyria when they took them out? They lost their big power. What happened to Rome when they took them out?
On
And on it goes. So it isn't a very wise idea to try and get rid of Jews. I don't care what you think of them.
When you act against the Jews, you're acting against God.
That's right, exactly. But we'll cover that in another subject sometime, because that's a big one. Okay, in chapter 36, at the very end, it says in verse 35 that the land will become like the Garden of Eden, and everything will be populated and fortified.
Wow.
As seen in verse 35.
Yeah.
Now when it says fortified, that tells me somehow the skirmishes aren't quite finished.
Right. Otherwise you don't have to fortify.
Yeah, exactly. And I hadn't planned to say much about chapter 14 of Zechariah, but the very first verse of chapter 14 gives you a recent history of what's gone on in Jerusalem. If you read it carefully, you'll know that the battles of 1948 is what it's talking about there. Some of the city will go out and so on and so forth. So here we know that if we look at this, we see us here in Israel are living through some of this prophecy, which has not all been fulfilled. What we see is There's been, the people are coming home.
Uh-huh.
We've got good produce growing.
Yeah, yeah.
But when they try to settle in the ruins, they get kicked out sometimes.
In the ruins, what do you mean?
Well, like these old places in the Samaria and
Oh, Judea and Samaria, yeah, right. Yeah.
They go into a hilltop where there used to be population of Jews and try to build it up, and nobody's living on the land.
Okay.
Somebody comes along and says,
empty
"Oh,
land.
that's mine."
It's empty land, and then they come along and claim it.
Yeah, so they're still getting taken out. Now, it was a few months ago that Netanyahu said, "No more
Yeah.
kicking the Jews out of their settlements." And along comes someone else in the government.
Well, you have Netanyahu, the Knesset, and then you have the court.
Yeah, then you have the court. Well, we have a little bit of that in America, or that's what we're seeing. So it's happening both places. But it's a fact, some of the people are getting kicked out again.
Yeah.
This says in chapter 36 that this isn't going to happen anymore. So we haven't reached all the point where we come and the places like the Garden of Eden and fortified.
Yeah.
We haven't quite got there. But we go on to chapter 37 and we get another overview of how God gathers.
Okay.
He talked about gathering them in 36,
Right.
but not in detail.
Right.
He talked about in 34, I myself will do it.
Mm-hmm.
37, we get how he does it.
Okay. Huh.
It's by his Spirit.
Oh, okay.
Because he tells Ezekiel, speak to those bones. Now, we know that people say, oh, this is the resurrection.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be,
It could be.
but it's more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the part where it gives how to explain the dry bones, God's bringing them out of the countries where they were dispersed.
Well, this is the context.
Yeah, that's the context.
You just mentioned 36, 30, 34, 36, and now this, 37.
Yes, and so the other thing is, it's in all the writings of those who are trying to admonish Israel that when they are out of their land, they're dead. They don't have a God.
Yeah.
In order to have God the way they should, they have to come back to the land. So if they don't have a God when they're outside the land, that means they're dead.
Yeah.
They're dead bones.
Yeah.
And God
So
says,
it's like a resurrection when they come home.
it's like a resurrection when they come home. And so God prophesies to this. And notice, a breath enters them, and they stand up a multitude.
Yeah.
Some say a vast multitude stand up. Some say an army, because they use the word host, which is used for armies of God clear through the Tanakh.
Uh-huh.
So, in a sense, this is God's army here on earth. Not just physical. They're supposed to be a witness, so a host that are also battling in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, they're going to bring justice and peace. And
That's right.
lots of things. Yeah.
So he says, you shall know, O my people, that I am Hashem. When I open your graves and lift you out of your graves, I will put breath into you, and you shall live again, and I'll set you upon your own soil.
Own soil. That's
Yeah, that's the key there. That's when you live. And then you'll know that I, the Lord, have spoken and acted. And right after that, then some people like to divide this chapter, one speaking about one thing, one speaking about another, but it's not really. Because now he tells what it means for him to bring them home, and it tells them it's not just Judah that's coming back this time. It's Joseph and his associates as well.
So the 12 tribes.
Yeah. So he's going to have the whole house of Israel.
Wow.
Now, the reason why that's important to know in chapter 37 is because over in chapter 36, he says when he has gathered them and the whole house of Israel's there, I will sprinkle clean water on you. He's not going to do the final cleansing and so forth without the whole house of Israel there.
Wow.
And there's not going to be a Joseph that's more spiritual than the rest of them.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a division. The house of Israel has been divided since Joseph went into Egypt. And they've only had tenuous times when they were one whole nation.
Yeah.
They had it during David and Solomon's time, and that was the end. That was only a short period of time.
Well, they were one nation from Joshua through Solomon.
They were,
Sort of.
except they weren't operating as one nation most of that time. So God hasn't had this thing that he's talked about in chapter 36 and 37. So this is what we want you to take and look at those chapters, think about them, and then we'll come back again and look at 38 and 39 and see some things there that help us understand more about where the king comes in on this.
Okay.
Okay.